Ron Culp at the Arthur Page Society Conference in California, and it's Monday, September 17th in 2007. Thank you for spending some time with us today.
It's good to be here.
Great. Well, I want to start out talking with you a little bit about how you got into PR and selected that. You graduated from Indiana State University with a bachelor's degree in political science and journalism,
Correct.
in 1970. And you held a series of positions in journalism and local and state government. And then suddenly in '77, you were manager of corporate communications with Eli Lilly. How did all that transpire?
Well, it is an interesting story, and the fact that I started out as a newspaper reporter, as you say, and then a friend who was in politics at the time in Indiana got me involved in a political campaign for a congressional candidate. And during that process, this candidate brought in a consultant from the East Coast who worked on the campaign. Long story short, we lost the primary. And as a result of that, the consultant said, you know, you need to get out of Indiana for a while. And I have a couple of campaigns I'm working on in New York State. So why don't you come out to Albany? I looked at the atlas to find out where Albany was. And my wife and I said, what the heck, it sounds like an adventure. So we went out there to work for a year on political campaigns. This was in the 1972 period when Nixon was running for re-election and Republicans were very much in control. Matter of fact, as a result of that election, in New York State, the governorship under Nelson Rockefeller and both houses of the legislature were both Republican. Then what happened is in 1974, Watergate occurs and things change. And so we went from being the majority power, where I ran a large public relations organization by then within the New York State Assembly, to being in the minority, where we had to then say, excuse me, can we get some service over here? And so things changed a lot. Fortunately, during that time, we befriended a number of people in Albany, including lobbyists for Eli Lilly. And he said, you know, I detect that you're probably not as excited about this whole scene as you used to be. When you're ready, you ought to come and talk to us about a job at Lilly. So I actually went there thinking that I was going to be working in government affairs in Washington and New York. And it turns out that when I showed up, the real need was in media relations. So I went into Lilly as department head of media relations.
Wow. Was that a difficult transition?
A big transition. Back then I had lots of hair, and I had very curly Afro-style hair. And I walk in, I knew I had to wear a three-piece suit. Back then it was a three-piece suit, so I had an ill-fitting three-piece suit. And I have a picture of this, my first day on the job when the employee publication comes and takes your picture. And so I'm sitting there with this three-piece suit, very tight, a vest on, and an afro. And they still hired me.
I remember those days.
Yeah. I wasn't alone.
Yeah, right, you weren't.
Yeah.
Well, let's jump to 1982 and talk about Oriflex.
Sure.
Okay, now this was Eli Lilly's controversial drug that was withdrawn from the U.S. market in 1982, only 12 weeks after it was introduced in the United States.
Right.
And it had been in the British area. Had been sold there for a year?
Well, we just started selling it there a little bit before,
Okay.
yeah.
All right. Now, Eli Lilly received a lot of negative press because of the recall of Oriflex. And it really suffered some reputational problems due to the reports of deaths of the British citizens that was then followed by the deaths of 11 citizens of the United States. So you had a PR nightmare,
Right.
crisis, and you implemented a crisis communication system, which I believe you had designed prior to this.
Correct.
It was a complicated sequence of events, and can you just tell us about the challenges that you faced and ethical decisions that you had to make at this time?
Sure. What actually Oriflex was, and the generic name was binoxaprofen, and this was the very first pharmaceutical product that any drug company had ever decided to launch through a public relations campaign.
Okay.
So that's a first itself as well. And so what had actually occurred, the drug hadn't, it was ready to be sold in the United Kingdom, but what happened is one of the medical doctors who was testing the drug wrote a report in the British Medical Journal, Lancet, that said, oh, by the way, I had a number of patients on this drug, elderly patients, and all of them had initial relief from arthritis, but they all died. And so this report was published just days before we were supposed to be going to the Waldorf Astoria in New York for a major news conference that we already had everything set in gear. So the day before, I'll never forget, the day before the news event, we met in Chicago, and senior management, concerned about the fact that this had taken place, this report was out there, but hearing, from the medical doctors on our team that, this was a fluke, we called this meeting together. The chairman of the company, Richard Wood, Gene Stepp, who's the head of pharmaceutical, Ian Shedden, the head of, who's the medical director of Lilly, and a bunch of other executives. And I will never forget, Gene Stepp turned to Ian Shedden, Dr. Shedden, and said, we're about to send Ron and his team to New York to launch this product. Is there any reason that you know of that we should not proceed? And he said, Dr. Shedden said, absolutely none whatsoever. This is, and he used the medical terms for the fact that this wasn't a scientific study that was done, blah, 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 and it contrasted with the work and the investigations that we were doing with the new drug application in the United States, so we proceeded. We showed up at the news event at the Waldorf, and it was a room full of people, cameras from all around the world. All the major media was there, and we had patients who had been on the drug and people who could not get out of bed 6 months ago who are walking. The photographer for our event used to have to crawl to the bathroom in the morning in pain, and he's down on his knees and hopping around, taking pictures at the event. I mean, it was a phenomenal product, I think. But what happened is we launched the drug, phenomenal news stories. Unfortunately, it sometimes occurs, the media will get out a little ahead of where we really intended for them to go, and they were declaring it a wonder drug, and anyone who had arthritis anywhere in the United States was clamoring to get this drug. Sales totally took off, and people and doctors were not reading the package literature that clearly said that if you have impaired renal function, if your kidneys aren't working, or if you have sensitivity to the sun, that you should stay out of the sun if you take it. All these other factors were not taking it. So what happened is the side effect profile just escalated, and it seemed it seemed like it was on the market longer than 12 weeks, but it was a fast 12 weeks. We had congressional hearings, we had FDA hearings, and it was literally 24/7 media calls. And I forgot a very important part of that. My wife was pregnant and expected to deliver our first son at that time, and we were in the delivery room, the labor room, I never forget, and my boss called and said a newspaper in Greece was calling from Athens with, they were on deadline, and media worked a little different back then. I mean, they were on deadlines and things rather, and so I said, I have something to attend to now, I'll call, in an hour or so. It was a crazy time. So it was a perfect storm. I think that having the communications program, the crisis plan in place, initially, everything just kind of falls apart, but then you kind of keep reminding people that, okay, let's go back to the book. We're not looking through the book, but we're already trained people as to how you're supposed to go through the crisis, who's going to be handling this aspect, who's talking to employees, who's talking to Wall Street, the message points, how they're constructed, et cetera. So, the action plan, after we decided to withdraw the drug, And that happened, by the way. We're flying back from a congressional hearing in Washington. The phone and then you didn't have airphones. And so we got into the hangar, the Lilly hangar, and my boss had a call waiting for him, call immediately the CEO, who said he just heard from the Secretary of Health and Human Services, Joseph Califano, that you have until 5 o'clock today to voluntarily withdraw the drug, or we're going to ban it. And obviously there are all kinds of legal issues involved with banning it, so literally sitting around the terminal, we decided that we were going to pull the drug, and that evening we had about 600 media calls that we fielded between then and the following morning. So it was an amazing time. I look back on it, and it was a defining moment in my career, in the fact that you were tested on so many levels. And that's where one of the Page principles about remaining calm was important, because people kept wondering why I hadn't fallen apart or killed somebody myself. It was a very stressful time, but the team just responded beautifully.
Is there anything you can share about? Okay, so you withdrew the drug. How did you recover from all of that? Were there any particular things that you did?
Yeah.
So that, obviously Lilly has maintained a reputation.
Correct. Yeah, the key, I think, in this case was responding quickly. We did have a lot of litigation afterwards, and we felt very strongly, and I still do, that it was a great drug. And I think, a lot of people who have arthritis today are being denied a product that if properly presented in the right setting with their doctor, they stay out of the sun, and they make sure that they drink lots of water, and that they're not over 80 years old, and all the other factors, that the drug could have really brought a lot of help to people. And there was a lot of that sentiment that was building. People after it was pulled were livid, people who were affected. So there was always a sense that maybe it was a good drug, that, that maybe was just introduced a little too soon. And so we decided to, put a stake in the ground and indicate that that's the last time we're going to introduce a drug through PR. And now that's changed. Now PR is the first place they go, and advertising, it's a totally different world than it was back then. But so the company decided, well, let's just pull back for a while, settle the litigation that's out there, and be good citizens about it, and make sure that through our philanthropy and everything else we do, that we restore our reputation primarily with the doctors. A lot of doctors were upset with us because of how we introduced this product, because it puts them in a situation where their patient will come in and demand it. And they may not know anything about the drug, and what do some doctors do? They go ahead and write the prescription, and then their patient either got sick, or there are other issues that arose. So we really had to go back in and focus on who our true customers were, and the fact that the pharmacists and the doctors who are prescribing it. So just and not going out too far on any of the new products that we launched. We were always very careful in how we trim back. And then we also decided to spend a lot more time on internal communications, because this was a devastating moment inside the company. Morale was just absolutely down, and we had to find ways of getting people, especially in the scientific area, that were coming up with new discoveries, that they didn't want this to happen to what they were working on. So there was a lot of that mending that had to occur.
An exciting time.
It was. At the time, you thought that you were going to lose your mind because of all of the demands, and you were working constantly, and you had people coming from you on all sides. But I'll never forget, Bettina Gregory from ABC News at the time was really following the story, and it was on. She was following it very closely. And, the media would always say, what's good about, the people at Lilly is you're in the middle of this problem, you're always calling us back. If you don't have an immediate answer, you get one as fast as you can, and you never leave us hanging. And so we tried to stay some of those principles that we're going to need friends there. And I think as a result, we got the benefit of the doubt, even though it was a bad situation.
Very good. Well, let's jump to 1993 and just talk a little bit about mergers and acquisitions.
Okay.
You became Divisional Vice President of Public Affairs with Sears, Roebuck and Company in 93.
Mm-hmm.
And then several years later, actually in 2002, Sears merged with Land's End. Now during that time, you placed a lot of importance on the internal stakeholders and communicating with the employees.
Right.
Of both organizations. And that took a lot of coordination and perfect timing. And were you working directly at that time with the CEOs? And talk a little bit about that.
Okay.
And share your recommendations about what are the PR issues during mergers and acquisitions.
Okay. The Land's End acquisition, actually the CEO, Alan Lacey, at the time, I worked pretty regularly with him, and Alan bounced this idea of we need to jumpstart our apparel offering at Sears, and this seemed to be a logical opportunity. And we'd looked at Land's End and Eddie Bauer and a bunch of other opportunities that were there in the past, but the stars were lining up, and we seemed to detect some interest from the Comer family, who was the primary shareholder in Land's End. So the negotiations started. I went to most of those sessions, and the exciting part from the PR person's perspective is that you were the only communicator in the room, professional communicator, because you're there with investment bankers and more attorneys, Wall Street attorneys than you could imagine, and sometimes the CEOs, but generally it was all of the negotiation, the backroom work was done, and they'd recess for a while, go talk to the CEOs and come back, and the sessions were just going on endlessly. So the good thing about being in the middle of that is you picked up the nuances that you're going to find very helpful later in how you communicated internally to both audiences. You found out what they were saying about how Dodgeville, Wisconsin, which is where Land's End is based, they view things differently than perhaps somebody in Chicago, where Sears is headquartered. So they're totally different messages. At Dodgeville, a large number of the employees also have full-time farming jobs, and they're working here either part-time or in the mornings, and then they're working on the farm that evening. And so there are whole different ways that they're viewing what's going on. And the people at Land's End were very prideful of their brand and what they did and their service mentality. So we knew that there could be the potential of clashes between what they viewed as this big conglomerate of Sears, an old line retailer, and then what they were doing, much of which was online. And so they wondered if these two would really come together well. So we had to put together communications plans for both how it was going to sell well to Wall Street, how it was going to sell to internal communications throughout the organization. And it all had to be together. You can't tell one person something at a different time. So making sure you had the right executives, and this is putting a road show together where you literally start. So we decided intentionally to start with the employees in Dodgeville, then go to their 3 major locations, then come back into Hoffman Estates, Chicago, and talk about it. And it was a very exciting rollout, because what happened is the employees of Land's End were applauding this deal. And our biggest concern is they were going to say, what? We want nothing to do with those guys. And instead, they were very excited about it. I can't necessarily say that that feeling may still exist, but it's certainly, we did what we were supposed to do up to that point.
Mm-hmm. Now, you had mentioned your concern about clashes between the two organizations and the employees. Did you find that there was any kind of a clash or conflict between you as the communicator who wants to get information out internally but also out to the media about what's going on, and the corporate lawyers who may be totally opposite from that and want to be kind of hush-hush, we don't need to tell the media anything right now?
Well, it's a good point, because I've been in those situations. In this case, it really wasn't, it didn't operate that way. And I do contend, and what I always encourage investment bankers to do is to bring the communications people in early. I said, you'll avoid the conflict because the communicator is going to understand why they can't. Sometimes there's a legitimate reason why you can't communicate something, or the timing issues are all resolved. And importantly, the communicator being there, I'm able to say, okay, here's what we need to do timing-wise. They're not thinking of timing of communications. They just want to get the deal closed. So as a result of being there, it made a total difference. Because contrast that to other deals I've been in where the phone rings and says, oh, by the way, we're going to be acquiring a new company, and you've got to put out a press release. And then I'm full of 50 questions, and then my staff has 50 more, and I don't have the answers. And that is just not the way it should be done. So I think the opportunity to actually be in the front lines, and even though it was excruciatingly painful to give up holiday weekends and the like, it was a smart thing to do. In the end, it just, you knew what was happening, you knew the rationale behind it, and you were better able to articulate to your own staff what they had to do. And then the staff loved it because they knew you had a seat at the table and that you were involved in all this discussion. You knew the characters that were making these decisions. And if you needed an answer, I got a call back a lot faster than if they said, somebody in PR is calling, thanks.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Right. Lessons learned. Very good. Okay. Let's talk a little bit about agencies and corporate PR.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you'll have to tell me if you agree with this or not.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm stating here that in recent years, PR agencies have grown in size and number, while corporate PR staff seem to be dwindling. And then perhaps that is because of all the mergers and acquisitions that have been going on. Now, it's about 1 year since you became Senior Vice President at Ketchum Midwest, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Have you experienced any challenges now that you're in that agency environment that really weren't evident when you were in the corporate PR environment? And has that been difficult, that transition?
I'm actually surprised that the similarities between the two are as great as they are. Everyone always talks about the differences. I think people in agencies think they work harder than people in corporate, and corporate think that the agency people have the best deal. And now that I've been in corporate PR for about 30 years and only 4 years total in agency side, the similarities are very, very strong. And I actually told somebody over dinner the other night that I think I'm working harder than I now than I did when I was at Sears in PR. And my wife quickly corrected me and said, no, that is not, take it from me, you're not. And because she remembers, the late nights and the like that I was consumed. So it must be age that I think that I'm working harder today. But it's the similarities are greater. Back to your point about whether or not the dynamics are changing between corporate, the pendulum is shifting, by all means. When I went to Sears, the PR function was well over 100. And that we had somebody whose responsibility essentially was to know everyone in the building, and he was kind of a goodwill ambassador at large. Mm-hmm. Former store manager, nice guy, didn't really have a job for him, but he'd been working here a long time, so let's put him into PR. And so my job was to restructure the function and put people in various roles where that made sense. So we reduced the staff significantly, and I still probably had a bigger PR function than I needed to get the job done. So we continued over the next 10 years to tweak and make sure that business really requires bottom line results, and we had to produce work that would add to the bottom line success and the reputational success of the company. And how many people does that take? And it certainly didn't take 118 people. So, and I think that's happening at all other, and has happened at all other companies. So with this downsizing of the corporate function, then all of a sudden when a new product introduction or an acquisition comes along, you're looking around saying, we're all strapped because we're now been right-sized. So let's call an agency in to help support us, for this single mission perhaps. So that's what's really changed, and why agencies are thriving today, and why I think there have always been smart people in agencies. The benches are getting stronger and stronger in agencies.
Do you think that's going to continue?
I see no end in sight. I think agencies are, and this is amazing, because when I first started out in this profession, I thought you had to have a job as a reporter to get into PR. So in the first several jobs I had in corporate America, I would have my HR people screen resumes, and I'd be looking for media experience. And it even started, and it probably went the first year or two at Sears, and then all of a sudden, the lights went off, and I'm like, these agency people, I think, have some good ideas. and now I go the opposite. What agency did you work for? If you're going to come work for an agency, it really helps to have some agency experience. And I only see continued upside on that. And I actually see some corporations, especially smaller ones, just totally outsourcing that function. That they're going to say, okay, this person might be responsible for communications, but the kind of stuff that we need is broad enough in scope that we can't build up all of these disciplines in communications, but an agency can just kind of do it as a turnkey for us.
Mm-hmm. So now that you're in that environment, what qualities and characteristics are you looking for when you're going to hire someone into an agency?
First thing I'm looking for is somebody who really is interested in doing the work. We get some resumes of people who really look good on paper. They've taken all the right classes, gone to all the right schools and everything else. One of our most recent hires from Northern Ohio University probably wouldn't have been on anyone's radar, but because this young person was able to come in and through his total passion for this profession and through his incredible research coming in. That's the other thing. We used to have to go read an old issue of Fortune magazine when we were going to be about the company we're going to talk to. Today, they're able to research so much better and have prepare themselves far more effectively than we were able to. So I think asking the right questions coming into a situation, not reciting that I know everything about your company or your agency when you come in for the interview, but just knowing about it, knowing what their specialty is. We had people when I was at Sara Lee Corporation that would come in and talk about how they just love the cheesecakes, and that's fine. But then now are you aware of the other products we have? And then they weren't aware at that point that we had Hanes and Legs and Playtex and all these other consumer products because, they grew up, eating Sara Lee cheesecakes, so they thought they were coming to a cheesecake factory. And that wasn't the case. Today, they'll come in with the ROI of the various products, and they're able to have a conversation, a business-oriented conversation with you about it. So I think passion and understanding of the business, and wanting to do that rather than it's either between PR or advertising. No, it's not between PR and advertising. You're going to come in and you're going to know what you want to do, and you're going to have to put a case together why you're going to be the best person for this PR opportunity, and ask good questions.
You mentioned the research and how important that is. Do you think the web has something to do with that now? What kind of an influence do you think that all the new technologies have on new professionals coming into the field?
Yeah, it's such an advantage, and it's also a disadvantage if you don't use it, because I have no patience now for somebody who doesn't understand what you're all about, somebody who hasn't done the basics of checking the website, really reading the website, and you come in and then all of a sudden you ask a question that clearly is uneducated. You could get away with that because in the olden days, because you just didn't have the access to the information. Today, almost all the answers are out there, and so it really helps you prepare to come in. The young people I'm seeing today that are just totally aware, they walk through that door knowing everything they should about the agency or the company that I was working with at the time, and that's just unbelievable. It's all based on the technology changes.
Mm-hmm. Let's kind of shift into the issue of trust.
Mm-hmm.
What do you feel is the key to building trust and credibility in an organization?
Wow.
Yeah.
Sprang that one on me. I think that, you mean from the PR function or the organization itself?
Let's look at the PR function.
Mm-hmm. Because it's very important, because a lot of PR functions don't have trust within organizations. It's far better than it used to be, where it was my PR guy is how we were introduced. Mm-hmm. And where my goal always working with CEOs in the past would be, how do I get them to stop referring to me as the flack or the PR guy who's going to come in and spin something into the person who he wants to call in because he has an idea to bounce off of the PR person. How is this perhaps going to be perceived by our various audiences? And so that really evolves over time. I didn't start there, and the first several jobs I was definitely the PR guy that they turned to say, clean it up. We were always saying, gosh, if we were only there initially, this wouldn't have happened. Mm-hmm. Because we knew how this would play. And so in some cases, we were brought in after the fact because, gosh, maybe we should have told you about this. And so the trust factor, it really is driven from the top of the organization. Unfortunately, a lot of people come in PR functions and they have great ideas and they could be very good counselors, but senior management has not yet bought in. And so that's why I think a lot of people are very much hung up on reporting structures, because it makes all the difference in the world if the CEO hired you. If the CEO is committed to what the PR function is supposed to be, then all of a sudden, you're able to have a whole different level of credibility within the organization. That allows you to work with people and gain their trust differently than when they just view you as the spokesperson or the mouthpiece of the organization. And you will never have the credibility because they're worried that what else are you telling the media? What else you're saying that, and so the only way they believe you is if they know that you understand the business of the company and that you're able to defend and build on the reputation of that company, that they all see you as a peer versus, you know, the person who just tell him what to tell the media. And so I think that trust is just gained over a lot of experience. None of us started, unfortunately, right out of the chute with a high level of trust because there's a lot of misunderstanding what PR is about. So it's just literally getting in and consistently building on top of one success or a problem, but you had answers that helped them to the next level. And it's just a constant building process to gain trust. Can't happen overnight. Can't be willed.
Do you believe it's important for a corporation to have an ethical mission statement or a credo? And should ethics training be provided for the staff of agencies as well as corporate PR?
Wow, two questions. The credo, I think, is important for a company, especially an iconic company that has a mission beyond maybe selling a product. You know, that there's some reason to exist. Overall, mission statements, I'm not a big fan of. I started to say hours, but I've spent days, weeks, and months developing mission statements that you could easily try to have a guessing game as to what company, if it wasn't identified in the mission statement, it represents, because they're all the same, essentially. So I think you need something internally for people to rally around, but a mission statement is usually too long and boring and self-serving to the point that it doesn't have credibility. So when we were at Sears, we threw out the mission statement and said that we created something under Arthur Martinez when he was CEO called the 3 C's. And we rallied an organization around 3 basic things that we wanted them to do. We decided that if you make this a compelling place to work, that's going to turn into a compelling place to shop for our customers, and therefore that turns into a compelling place to invest for shareholders. So we called it the 3 C's, and sometimes the 3 compellings. And that caught on like lightning. We had mission statement after mission statement after mission statement before that for 117 years. And within 3 months of the 3 C's, you could go into any store in the United States and ask any level employee what the 3 C's stood for, and they could tell you. And what happens? Sales increase, and the stock goes up because you got a single focus for the organization, and everyone agreed that it was so basic that I don't have to have a lot of words to explain it. So I think if it's kept simple, it really works. Now, with reference to your question on ethics training, I think ethics training is critically important, but it can't be sophomoric. That it has to be almost fun and to get engaged with, because it makes you think more than don't do this, do this, don't do this. That's not the case. But take examples of things where there may be a lot of gray area, and then how would you respond? And see how people respond, not as a test to say, you stupid, you don't get it, but to have them understand that a lot of ethical issues we're facing are really gray areas. There were ethical issues in the Oriflex debate that we had around a table of people. Should you, when you know that 11 people in the United Kingdom have died, should you proceed with launching the product when you might have had some personal concerns about it? And was it sufficient that your medical advisors said, no, absolutely not? Or should you just say, let's just give it a little bit more time? And so those kind of issues, you know, you could have played that. But So getting people to really think, I think it kind of raised the level on where the ethical standards are, and it doesn't become, like, mom and dad saying, no, you can't do that. But engage them in what are the proper ethical standards, and I think it helps people understand that it's just not black and white.
That's right. It's the case method that's important pedagogy in education. So,
Oh, good.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. And here's a real important question. So is it credo or credo? Because I've heard everybody pronounces it differently.
Well, and you're not going to get in trouble for pronouncing it either way because I use both.
Okay, all right. I think I've used both today, even. Yes,
Exactly.
today, yeah. All right. Who had the most significant influence on your career, and how did that relationship affect your professionalism? How as you developed?
Well,
a mentor.
Yeah, well, I have many. I'm lucky to have many, and I'm a mentor to many. And I think that comes from the fact that I would be hard-pressed to pick one, but I can.
A few.
Yeah. Well, I go back to people in my childhood who always encouraged me to do things, and things that they probably were amused about, but they saw that there was some creativity link or something there, so they were encouraging me to do crazy things. So the local newspaper editor, who when I was 11, 12 years old, said, why don't you write a guest column for the newspaper? And I wrote these crazy, thoughts. And then, and she said, you ought to just continue that. So that's why I decided I want to be a newspaper reporter when I went to college. And then in college, I had a couple of professors. Claude Billings was one of my professors. And Claude just kept saying, just kept pushing me where the opportunities might go within journalism for me. And then after I went to work at the first newspaper, John Rutherford was my news editor. I disliked that man with a passion. He was the meanest person on the news desk, but boy, did I not misspell words. This is before spell check, and you're coming in and you're basically saying, I have to look that word up in a dictionary, change the word. And so if you misspelled or anything, or if you had a fact that wasn't right, but I look back at John as being a huge influence. But on the PR side, it probably was a gentleman by the name of Jack Raymond. Jack was a former New York Times reporter that then went off to set up his own small boutique in New York. And John was an advisor to the CEO at Lilly. And Jack was a advisor to the CEO at Lilly. So Jack always talked to me when he came to town, and we'd go to dinner or lunch. And at one point, he comes in and says, I really have an idea for you. You're in Indianapolis, Indiana, a fairly small market. You have essentially the top PR job that you're going to get at Lilly. So you need to get into a broader network of PR to be discovered in this profession. So let's keep our ears open for opportunities in New York. And so that then led to my getting a job at Pitney Bowes as Director of Public Relations. And Jack and I stayed in touch for years and years. And as a matter of fact, I talked to him, I called him about 2 years ago, and I decided to go on this little tour of thanking all of my mentors that were still alive. And either in writing, or I would call them, or I would go have lunch. So I was going to New York, and I had lunch with him, and I thanked him. At the time, he was in his late 80s. And then last year, I mentioned him at the Page meeting in a speech that I gave about mentoring. And I sent him a copy of it. He called me, and we had a great conversation. And I'm glad we did that, because I just heard from his wife about 2 months ago that he died. And I feel better having said thank you when I did than wishing I had.
Right. Oh. We talked a little bit about this. So, are journalists the watchdogs of businesses?
They used to be. They still think they are, but they're not. It's far broader than that now. Everyone's a watchdog. We're so empowered now with the ability. I mean, I blog. It's you just have so many avenues to get points of view out there. So we're so engaged that you never know where it's going to come from. They still play a huge role, but very often they're following somebody else's lead on the story, and they're no longer where they used to be, and they know it. Mm-hmm. Yeah. They're as frustrated as some corporate people are that it's not as easily controlled messaging as it used to be.
Are there any other changes that you've observed in the practice of PR during your career?
I think the biggest one is I thought it was stressful when we only had 2 news cycles a day. Some 20 years ago, 25, 30 years ago, definitely was easy. You knew that by the time you answered the question for at noon for an afternoon paper, or at 5 o'clock to 7 o'clock for the morning paper, that your job was done. And you had that window, that luxurious window of time between the media calling and you have to get an answer. And now it's totally instant. Absolutely, you have to be on top of so many more issues. You also have to be able to admit that maybe you don't have the answer faster than we used to in the past. Oh, and the wonderful thing about current technology as well that I think has helped expedite movement of information is we didn't have voicemail when I started out. And an assistant or the person at the desk next to you would take a little message and it'd be put on your desk, and then you'd sort through the messages to see who you're going to call back. So, just a quantum leap in all kinds of technology and communications that has changed the fact that this is instant, no longer two news cycles a day, and I think that's what the quantum change in what all of us are doing versus where we used to be, and we thought we were busy before. Not at all.
Yeah,
yeah,
no idea, right?
Exactly. They have no idea.
Well, we're going to just move here into the final section. You've been involved with educating or working in classrooms with some students.
Yep.
Just tell me a little bit about that. I mean, what students have you worked with? What universities
Sure.
and the things that you do there?
Well, I like going back to my alma mater, Indiana State, and talking with students there because just like most of them today, I was first generation college, and so I think that's very important to wherever you can help encourage young people to excel, and the fact that this world is a pretty exciting place to go into, and don't settle for something smaller than what you deserve or want to seek. So I like going back and talking with those students, and quite involved. I've, along with my wife, given a grant to the school to create something called Real World 101, where young people are able to find out what it's like to really be entering the work world. Everything from social etiquette issues that they need to be aware of, to interview situations, to resume writing, et cetera. And because a lot of schools and budget cuts, had to stop doing those kind of things. When I was in school, there was a course that my wife and I loved that Mary Alice Banks taught, one of our favorite teachers, a 1-hour course called Social Orientation. So we knew which way to use the soup spoon, which everyone should do, and how to set a table, to how to act when you go to a funeral, a wedding, whatever, what a receiving line is like. So all those sorts of things, I think, are kind of, a distant past in a lot of schools. So we're trying to, bring that back into our alma mater. I've recently gone to Illinois State University, talked to a conference on ethics at Illinois State, did the same thing at Northern Illinois, DePaul University, Northwestern, and it's exciting for me because you see young people who are trying to figure out exactly what they want to do career-wise. I was there as a junior and senior. I didn't know there was anything about public relations, never even heard of it. I thought, I was going to be a journalist. And so I think exposing young people to all kinds of ideas, and just encouraging them to do something that they're going to have passion about is fun. And then to see how they're going to react and the kind of questions that they have, and they're very engaged. And then there's some who aren't.
Right.
And but it's society, so it works beautifully. But I get very energized, and I love being back in the classroom. Don't think I could do it full time. It's a tough job.
It is tough, yeah.
But I love going. I just was at Marquette University recently and spoke to a couple of classes up there. And my son went to Marquette, and I just felt that it was kind of a way to give back a little bit, and for the great education that he got, and revisit the campus that we used to see when we'd go see him.
Did he go into the PR field? Or
well, kind of unrelated. He's done the first part of my career. He's gone into politics.
Oh, okay.
So he's working in Washington, D.C. for a congressman.
Wow, that's very good.
And my other son is going into the other part of my career, and he is he's the editorial side, working for a magazine here in California.
Oh, okay, right. Yeah, very good. Let's talk about the centers.
Mm-hmm.
How important do you think centers such as the Planck Center at Alabama and the Page Center at Penn State, how important are these things to the industry? And what should we be doing?
Right. Funding them more than we are currently to start. They're critically important. I think anytime, this profession more than most is kind of going under its own momentum, but we haven't done enough to build up an infrastructure, a base of knowledge that future leaders in this profession are going to be able to draw from. I'm constantly, looking back at historical points in time, what happened back then. A lot of that doesn't exist, and just having resources that are going to be able to say that, I think I can tap into the Planck Center because I've got a leadership issue, maybe organizational issue that I've got to tackle as a leader in my organization, and what has happened historically there. So there are some resources out there, but there aren't enough. So the data and the knowledge that we're going to be able to pull in together through these two centers, I think, are going to be critically important. Same thing for the Institute of Public Relations. They're all should be encouraged. They're all underfunded, and we have to find ways of really beefing up what kind of support that they're getting.
Yeah, I'm hopeful in the future that the Planck Center and the Page Center will be able to collaborate on some things, but it's very interesting to hear about the leadership. I think it's about, Jack Coton was talking about it last evening. There's a booklet that they're trying to put together about leadership, or you wanted to
right, correct, yeah.
And then, of course, the Page Center and the oral history collection that will be online and searchable by students and scholars. So, hopefully we're beginning to build that base for the future.
Yeah, it's very, very exciting. I think what both centers are going to be bringing to the profession, and it's just so critically important. That's the other thing I try to tell the young people is go back. I know it's going to be boring to you at some times to go back and read about something as prehistoric as the Tylenol issue. But you do learn from it. And one thing you learn from it is times were different. That was the most brilliantly handled crisis communications event of maybe a 20 years period of time. Well, today, none of that would work in this environment. But you're going to understand, what's changed, and you're going to better understand why it's different today and why it has to be different if you understand the past.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Which of your accomplishments are you most proud of, and why?
That's the toughest one. I think that probably, if I call it an accomplishment, it's all of the people that tell me that I've helped mentor them. Mm-hmm. And I think looking at where they are in their careers, and I wouldn't look at some of them as having been a mentor to them. John Harris, who now heads public relations at Sara Lee, or Ann McCarthy, who heads PR at Western Union, a whole number of people who are now in leadership positions in corporate America. I didn't think I was a mentor, but obviously I hear from them that
they think differently.
Yeah, they think differently. And I think when you're doing it without that being your goal, it kind of is very enriching. I'm going to start a website, a blog on essentially helping guide people in PR careers, which was an idea, interestingly enough, by a lot of young people that I've been working with. And one of them wrote the plan saying, here's what you ought to do. And so they brainstorm with me on how it's going to work, and then I've got a bunch of ideas that will go into it. So I think that probably helping raise the level of the talent that comes into profession by identifying this is a real leader of this profession, and whatever we can do to help make sure that they make it. And I believe the same thing is important. My second passion is making sure that we do a better job of increasing diversity in the profession. And so we have a model that we've set up in our office to make sure that every minority who comes to work sees a career path that is achievable. And we identify someone at a senior level and somebody at the entry level and places in between that they can see how they've moved through the organization. And I think that that's something that hasn't been too apparent in this profession, and we need to do more of that as well. So those are kind of the dual things that I look at. That I'm further along in mentoring than I am in increasing diversity, understanding the profession. But I think that both are hopefully going to be things I look back at and say I feel very good about what I've done.
Well, the last thing I wanted to ask is, do you have anything else that you would like to share with the future PR professionals, this next generation?
Yeah, I think the key thing that it would be very important is to remember people along the way who are helping you. And then once you take the next step is to remember them then too. Mm-hmm. So I've stayed in touch with college professors, with Nan McGlenn until she died, the editor of the hometown newspaper, and all these people along the way, because it means so much to people to know. And it's not like you're bugging them by contacting them about everything and asking them for help. But, oh, by the way, I thought you'd be interested in knowing that I just graduated from college. By the way, I just landed my first job as a account coordinator at an agency. Whatever is happening, you remember them maybe in a card in the holidays. Just stay in touch with the people who have helped you along the way, because there's something about the karma that happens, when a lot of people are thinking good thoughts about you, that helps you succeed in your career.
That's good advice.
Good.
Well, I want to thank you very much for taking the time to just share some of your experiences with us.
Well, I enjoyed it very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good trip down memory lane.
Yeah. Okay.